All right. So, hi Neha, I'm Kritika, and it's really nice to have you here. Let's start with a brief introduction of yours and how did you get associated with Amaha?
So for me, the journey of mental illness in the family and caregiving is an extremely personal one. I've been a caregiver for many years, maybe over 30 years of my life, and been looking at the mental health landscape for that long to identify various gaps in terms of service delivery, in terms of infrastructure. The absolute fulfilling thing to do is to be able to say, can we build what is an ecosystem for mental health care? So that everyone has not necessarily a gold standard, but the base standard of healthcare in this country. With that dream and ambition, I joined Dr. Amit Malik in 2019 to build out the dream of Amaha, to be able to provide an integrated services platform such that people across 300 cities are today accessing our services in over 15 languages. And as we set up our centers today we have centers in Delhi, Mumbai, and Bangalore, and we aim to set up many more. The idea really is to be able to give people touch points online and offline for whatever kind of care and support they need, and then to be able to build communities online of support. So we've got communities for addiction, for depression, and now also a caregiver community, so that people, no matter what their needs are, have a place that they can call their own, where they can feel they belong. It's a safe space that is non-judgmental, and yet it comes with the access of the entire expert care as well as peer-based support. So that really has been the lack and the needs that I have felt over the last 3 decades of my life, and what I hope to try and fulfill through the promise of Amaha in the present and going into the future as we build on this dream with a phenomenal team where we have over 130 mental health professionals in-house at Amaha, and Amit and I are committed to providing the most accessible, appropriate mental health care for anyone in need as we go forward.
So, I think I'll jump straight to the questions. My first question to you would be so transitioning from being cared for to becoming, let's say, a caregiver. I'm sure it was a profound shift. What insights would you like to share about your personal journey? And, how has it influenced your perspective on caregiving in general as a journey?
I think just the idea of caregiving and receiving care to begin with is a taken for granted concept. You know, when you're actually in it, you don't really realize that you're playing a certain role and it's towards a certain objective, and perhaps there is someone who is unwell physically or mentally. And so it just sort of happens in my own case as well. As a young person, growing up and going through school and so on, I saw mental illness in my family, but it was not something that we were able to identify and name and pinpoint. So at that stage, it was more about crisis management, dealing with challenges, dealing with emergency situations, dealing with social isolation and stigma, and a general sense of withdrawing from community and what that did to our sort of family system. I think over time, as we realize that there is a medical illness at play and what the nature of that is and how less people understand it, I think that is when one actively realized that there is a caretaking responsibility here, that there is a responsibility to manage someone's healthcare medically, but also look at what their social relationships can be like, what their integration into community and mainstreaming looks like. So for me, it's been a very personal journey over the last 4 decades, pretty much of my life. Um, because ever since I was very young, my mother had a schizophrenia illness that set in, and she was actually untreated and undiagnosed for many years. And so it took a long time for our family to find any sort of um, uh, control over the illness and be able to manage it and maintain it in a way that today she can lead a very successful integrated life.
Right. So, thank you for sharing with us about your mother. I would actually want to understand from realizing that there might be somebody who needs care to accepting that you might be a caregiver. Um, could you outline a few steps that the users would also go through, let's say? Because I'm sure that there would be a lot of people who would be going through this journey also of caregiving. So, right from realizing that, somebody needs care to realizing and accepting that you are now a full-time caregiver, what do you think are the stages?
So in the Indian context, family sort of assumes that role, and it's not necessarily the same way in certain Western cultures. But in the Indian context, you're sort of any kind of mental illness is experienced by the whole family. It has economic consequences, it has social consequences. If somebody's in school or college, it has a consequence on their education, on somebody's ability to be productive job-wise. And so, sort of initially, you are just sort of coping, right? You are trying to integrate it and manage your life while doing the caregiving. And in that sense, you're hoping that it doesn't take too much of a toll on you, either in terms of your health or in terms of your abilities to function in a sort of a holistic way. Somewhere over time, I think that recognition is really important, because what happens is that caregivers tend to take themselves for granted, and they don't tend to necessarily create any healthy boundaries for themselves. We have a lot of guilt and shame around saying no and around doing less. And especially if it's for a parent or a child or a sibling, there is a sense of, or a spouse, there is a sense of not being enough and not doing enough.
Right.
So I feel caregivers carry a lot of this sort of burden and that they put on themselves often, and also society puts on them. And sometimes that's very much the need of the hour. I mean, there is literally nothing else that the caregiver can do except provide that care, because some of these conditions can be quite harrowing and quite distressing for a long period of time. So these are typically recurring relapsing conditions. And so for long durations of somebody's life, they are adopting this role. And so it does take a toll. It's really important to recognize that. It's really important to build a community of support around caregiving so that it's not in isolation. And you are able to build a tribe around that, and then be able to bring in the right professional support in terms of therapists and psychiatrists, the right community-based support, and create sensitization within the workplace, within the education system, so that overall the whole ecosystem is built to support your caregiving journey. I think that is the bit that people sometimes fail to do for themselves, and there is nobody else to do for them often. And so I would really stress on the importance of that, particularly given these are long-term conditions, and it's not a 1 day, 1 week, 1 year. It can go on for years and years.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that, Neha. So, in your journey as a caregiver, what kind of systemic support did you receive, from the Indian mental health infrastructure, and what did that sort of give you as takeaways, or what lessons did that give you, and how have you implemented that in Amaha's journey, or how are you, let's say, trying to implement that?
I think for me, as I've looked at the healthcare infrastructure and the services and the expertise that has been available in this country, and in many parts of the world, it's much the same. It's all in silos. It's fragmented care. It's not really organized in a way that it serves the needs of the people or of the family. So that ability to say, okay, can I please understand exactly what my entire situation is? What are the pros and cons of various treatment options? Can I understand if there is a plan around how this integrated care can work together, and what might be my milestones? None of this is communicated. So what I've seen in my experience over the years and years, people sort of finally, after 4, 6, 10 years, in our case, 20 years of untreated illness, go into their first appointment. And, there is a 95% treatment gap, because most of the people don't even get to their first appointment. But those who do, my belief is, and this is the sort of, for me, the guiding mantra for Amaha as well, is that after someone takes that first step and says, I'm ready and willing to get help, after that, there should be an integrated service that is available for the family and for the individual who is suffering. And that really is the linchpin, to be able to provide that communication, that information, to be able to provide the diagnosis, to be able to provide all the aspects of care, whether it is community-based care, whether it is psychiatric care, therapeutic support, and group support, to be able to provide all of that digitally as well as in a physical infrastructure, is really about creating an ecosystem of care around that person. So that, at the touch of a button, whether it's on the phone or on a WhatsApp or on a Zoom call or physically walking into a session, their time of getting help is pretty quick. And that relief is what people are looking for. So the gap is in people going from service to service, from provider to provider, because quality is credibility, and quality is in question. People don't really know who to trust. This isn't really a word of mouth referral space as much, even though whatever little there is does go by that. And then you have these celebrity doctors who, everybody's trying to get to. But where is the systematization and the standardization of care? How can we ensure that this is not even about setting the gold standard? This is about setting the base standard for how mental health care should be delivered in this country. So that's really the sort of founding dream of Amaha, Can we build a service that is accessible? Can we build a service that is customized and appropriate for you? And can it be such that it is affordable and accessible? I mean, today we're across 300 cities. We do 15 languages. It's all about being available for people in the cultural context that they best need it.
Okay. I think my next question will be around since you've been a caregiver for a really long time. I want to understand, even for the users, how important is it for them to seek mental health support as a caregiver, as they will go through, various milestones, various, let's say landscapes through their life. And how do you think that they can actually, get there? Because most of the times, like you mentioned, caregivers do not really, there's feelings of guilt and shame associated with everything. How would you want to, how would you highlight the importance of seeking therapy for caregivers?
I think one of the important barriers for us to get help is this sort of social conditioning also, that it is selfish to get help for oneself. It is self-indulgent. You know, if you have a certain amount of time, money, and resources, you should be spending it on somebody else or the person who is visibly and critically in distress. And those are some of the challenges. So caregivers often tend to, I say they often are minimizing, denying, or altering their own reality. They are losing touch with what their own needs are, what their own desires in life are, because all the time the priority is either the crisis or the person in crisis. And sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, it can go on for a long period of time because these are recurring chronic lifelong conditions. Often there is only management of the conditions and not really a cure. And so in that scenario, how do we help caregivers actually recognize the need to get help for themselves? To me, personally speaking, I think I spent my early 20s just banking on resilience and just running through everything. I used to do a lot of sport in my early days. And I feel like the coping mechanism at that stage, as it is for many young people, was just fight, flight, or freeze, right? But as you go on in your years, you realize that that is not enough. There will be times in people's lives when they will realize that actually resilience and strength and all of this is overrated. And it really is about the vulnerability that you are able to sort of see yourself and show to others and recognize your own limitations. Because then you are coming from a place that is very real to you. Otherwise sometimes it becomes a victim and perpetrator cycle. Sometimes it becomes, there is a lot of resentment on the one hand. Then there is what you call caregiver fatigue or compassion fatigue and burnout, in that sense. So to avoid those situations, simply recognizing that every human being has a set of basic needs and desires that they need to fulfill for their own peace and happiness and fulfillment. And as the old saying goes, you can't fill somebody else's cup if your own is not full. And so just being mindful about that, continuously investing in oneself as well as an equal party, right? As someone with equal rights, and making sure that there is time and money and effort invested in one's own caregiving, whether it is talking to friends, whether it is doing things to have a break and have a certain sort of change of scene and distraction, or it is getting sort of some level of therapeutic support. I've seen many cases where there is one family member who has an addiction or a distress psychosis or something, and the other caregiver is going through severe depression or anxiety, but totally unaddressed because the entire focus and attention is on this. Now, what happens is that these things, as they're in the family system, they tend to stay in the family. They tend to go across generations. They will impact the children in the family. They impact the family dynamics. They impact the family's relationships with society at large. And so it goes on, right? And so the way to think about it is this is a vicious cycle that sets in if you don't do the right care management at the right time. How do you convert this into a virtuous cycle where you are replenishing your own bucket, then you are doing the caregiving that you need to do, and you are able to lead a full life the best you can in the circumstances? Just being mindful and desiring that is, I think, the first step. And then getting the right help for that is obviously the second step for people to be able to lead a full, happy, integrated life.
Right. So even in here, I noticed that, we are focusing on, care receiver also leading an integrated full life. Can we, shed a little bit of light upon how receiving help as a caregiver can actually help the care receiver's life? right? Because, right, you mentioned that, we're breaking the cycle of generational trauma, possibly being passed over.
In fact, you're so right in saying that the caregivers getting help for themselves in time and alongside the recovery journey is so critical for the person suffering as well. So if you take the example of addictions, today you have the Alcoholics Anonymous program, but then you also have the Al-Anon program for families of alcoholics. You have the Al-Teen program. Now, the reason these exist is because when there is an addiction in the family, it affects everybody. Now, if the person is on their road to recovery and they are getting better, but the family is still stuck in the old patterns, in the old ways, and is still sort of struggling, and a lot of toxicity has set in, a lot of betrayals have set in, and a lot of resentments and fears have set in, then that will hold the recovery back. Right. So by default, if these are family diseases, then the care has to be extended to the entire family. That is the first principle. It's not just true for addiction, it's true for any mental illness or physical illness, right? The second is that everybody wants to feel like they are a contributing member of the family, that they are a supportive member of the family, even if they are the person with mental illness. Everybody wants to have a sense of agency, a sense of being able to make a difference in someone else's life. And so the more independent and the more sort of self-sufficient we are able to make those who are suffering and assert our own boundaries as well for caretaking, the more they will also learn to respect that boundary and be able to pick up for themselves and do things. Right? So it creates a sense of empowerment. It creates a sense of accountability, right? After all, you say that, why should one change when there is no motivation to change, right? But if there is boundaries that need to be respected, if there are other people's rights and needs that need to be respected, automatically the motivation to change comes in. And so certain behaviors and certain attitudes and approaches that even people with mental illness have, they will themselves become more conscientious because they also want to do their bit for their family member. So that is the second thing. And it's really speaking to the dignity and the right for each one to be a contributing member, not just in the family, but also at community at large, right? Also in society. So I think that's the sort of second point. And the third really is that, recovery is a long road. And this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. And, in the marathon, there might be many sprints that one may run from time to time. And so the recognition that we are all in this together builds a sense of solidarity, builds a sense of connection and camaraderie. If one person in the family is falling off as a victim or is resentful or is getting burnt out, then the whole family will be pulled back, right? So it's almost a collective responsibility to say that if we all need to rise above and create this virtuous cycle of recovery and healing and rehabilitation, then that means walking that marathon together. And I think that's really the message for everybody out there.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right. I think more to a very structured question. So many caregivers struggle with feelings of guilt and inadequacy, right? How do you generally say that what would be the best way to manage these emotions for caregivers? And
so the important thing is that, the journey of caregiving ends up becoming very, very personal. People take it very personally that I am the one who has been given the responsibility of taking care of this person, and I have to make sure that this person is fine. But we have to recognize that mental illnesses often don't have any cure. They are at best managed to be able to create whatever is your fullest life possible. And so nobody, not even the psychiatrist, nobody can take full responsibility and a guarantee of recovery. So oftentimes people carry this burden and they feel, in Alcoholics Anonymous and in alcoholism, they say, you did not cause it, you cannot control it, and you cannot cure it. And that is what applies to everything, So there is a certain degree of, I would say, surrender that is required also, a certain degree of acceptance that is required, that in spite of our best efforts, it is not in the hands of the caregiver. And therefore, the caregiver should not bear guilt that they are the ones who have to fix somebody's problem or cure it. These are things that people have to learn to live with and learn to cope with. And caregivers recognizing that, I think, takes the guilt away and takes the self-blaming and sort of self-shaming approach of saying, I didn't do enough, I could have done more. At the same time, the opposite is also true. Some people just abandon their relatives, right? They just I was just at a conference this morning speaking at the Schizophrenia Awareness Association, and they said some people just pay a driver to drop off somebody into a jungle, right? And this might be after years of caregiving, simply because they've reached a burnout. So both realities exist. And so to keep both in mind, it's really important to make sure that one is filling one's own bucket and making sure that we're not taking personal responsibility, either for being a factor in causing it or for being the sort of God Almighty in controlling the outcome, because that may not be the case. And it will only create frustrations, it will only create impatience, which is not going to help. Instead, people actually educating themselves. What is this illness about? What are the biopsychosocial factors, all the contributing factors in the environment, in the genetic history, in the biomakeup, in the sort of environment of this person that have created this? What have been the traumas that have created this? How can I best support this caregiver? What should I do? What should I not do? Where am I just getting into an enabling pattern where I think I'm doing a lot to safeguard this person and care for them, but actually I'm just making them more dependent or making it worse, So people educating themselves about what are the actual needs of that illness and in the way that that illness is manifesting in that person. How do you manage symptoms? How do you manage recovery? And how do you manage self-care in that journey alongside? I think that is really the balance that people ought to understand and spend time on, because it will really sort of stand them in good stead for the long haul.
Got it. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think my next question is more around, the mental health infrastructure in India. So we do face, very unique challenges within the Indian mental health scenario. Um, could you elaborate on some of the specific past and present day challenges that you've encountered?
So it's, as we talked about mental illness and the whole journey of families with mental illness being sort of a biopsychosocial mix of factors. And so therefore, even recovery and rehabilitation has to come across all of these quarters. It can't be one dimensional. Now, if you look at the way that care management has been given in this country, first from an infrastructure perspective, right? How much it lacks the basics in terms of basic ability to have privacy, to have dignity of care, to have cleanliness and hygiene in these centers that are there, and what kind of malpractice or practice is being given in those centers, right? What kind of regulations, what kind of guidelines are they following? All of those have been severe challenges over the past. How do you ensure that you're getting the right kind of care for your patient and not just something that is sort of a standard copy paste for all patients? So infrastructure wise, and there's a sheer lack of the number of beds and the number of infrastructures, hospitals and other establishments that are needed. Nehas published a report saying India needs 36,000 beds. This was a pre-COVID number. Now, clearly, for the middle class, for the upper middle class, there are paying audiences. And now, of course, it's even covered by insurance. Where do they go? Where is that infrastructure where they can feel that they are getting the right quality of care in the right setting? So that is the first sort of gap in the system. The second is in the way that the services are organized, and when you talk about expert care, psychiatrists are functioning separately, therapists are functioning separately, people download an app at whim, and then they go and join some local community, and none of this speaks to each other. And so in a sense, they could be working off different diagnoses and different care plans across different service providers. And so the integration of care, the idea of bringing multidisciplinary care together so that a person is getting a full comprehensive plan of what they need, whether it's a pharmacology support or a therapeutic support or community-based support, is really key. And so at Amaha, we've tried to be extremely conscientious of saying that when someone comes into a service, that they're given a thorough evaluation in every front, and then sort of a more comprehensive, holistic plan is created for them that has combinations of all of these things, so that people don't have to go pillar to post looking for these services and trying to figure out what will work best for them. Can somebody actually take that burden off? Can somebody help me as a caregiver make the right decisions about saying, what are my options? What is the kind of care I can expect? What is the plan looking like? And what are the milestones that I'm getting? So this bringing that care together and creating it under one umbrella entity has really been a big priority at Amaha. Over the last year and a half, bringing together Children First to be able to deliver care to children all the way from 3 months, 6 months onwards has enabled us as an ecosystem to provide care across the whole lifespan. So now, truly for the family, whether you're a toddler or you're an adolescent or teenager or you're a geriatrics patient, you can have entire integrated care under one umbrella ecosystem. And that really is what is a big need. And that speaks to the service and quality of care. The third aspect is around the accessibility, the communication, the ease of access. Somebody talking to me in my local language. Like I mentioned at Amaha, we do 15 languages. And the reason for that is people are most comfortable talking in their mother tongue when it comes to their deep emotional sort of issues. And so in that sense, the ability to be accessible, to be relatable, to create a lot of dignity and empowerment in the communication that we share, so that the people and their families actually feel that they are sort of sitting in the driver's seat of their own recovery journey, and we are supporting them. So that is really sort of the dream scenario that I've personally dreamt of for the last 30 years. And I feel like if we were able to stitch that care together, then hundreds and thousands of people who get into care much later will be able to access services earlier. Who spend many years after coming to a service trying to figure out what is the right option for them, will be able to get to the right solution faster. And we know that that will directly impact the outcomes. And so overall, the recovery will be better, and the family will go through less distress, less cost, less effort, and just more gain and better outcomes sooner in their life. And that's really the idea of Amaha.
Thank you. Okay, now this is related to stigma. So throughout your journey of your work and personally also, you must have definitely encountered various aspects of stigma. How do you think we can collectively work towards reducing stigma surrounding mental health, both on a personal and societal level?
My biggest belief around stigma is just simply to talk about your story. It has never happened that I've been anywhere in the world doing any kind of mental health talk and not got 100 stories back. I think people are just looking for permission. People are looking for the validation to say, is it safe? Is this a non-judgmental space where I can share? And so by initiating that, sharing your story, sharing your experiences, what gave you hope, what were the challenges, it is truly empowering, because this is a reality in every home, whether we admit it or not. 1 in 4 people are suffering from mental illness. That means the other 3 are the caregivers. And so, at the end of the day, this is an entire society's problem. Looking for permission, looking for vocabulary, looking for the narrative to actually speak about it. So I would say that's the first step to take. The young people are really leading the way. Today, you have young people who are openly talking about it from grade 3 onwards, grade 5 onwards, talking about mental illnesses, talking about challenges that they have, educating their parents, taking their parents into therapy. So let's listen to our children. Let's be as open and non-judgmental as they are. And let's open our hearts out and speak about what's really going on, because stigma will then be a thing of the past. As it is, when it comes to COVID, the mental illnesses have become so generalized now. There are so many challenges that have emerged in every household that this is not a question anymore, whether there is suffering and challenge in the world. I think more and more people are talking about it. Now the conversation has to shift from talking about a problem to figuring out what is the right solution for that problem. And that is really where Amaha is at, to be able to be there for you when you are ready to address that problem, to be able to provide a full service solution, so that wherever you are, you have the right kind of care at the right time, in the right way, customized to your personal needs.
So as a final thought, what are your hopes and aspirations for the future of mental health landscape? And and how do you want to amplify the mental health awareness and support? And what kind of contribution are you looking at from people on an individual level and also on a systemic level?
So as you talk about a changing or an evolving mental health landscape, what does it really mean, right? We've already established that it matters to everybody. If there's 1 in 4 person who is affected by a mental illness, then 3 people are caregiving to that person. And so it really is a generic problem. And so in that sense, we need leaders across segments to be educated and to be vocal about supporting mental health challenges. Whether it is in employers, whether it is in government, whether it's in policy, insurance, healthcare, of course, because it does touch everyone. And so the more and more examples there are and conversations right from the top down, so that mental health conversations are not happening in silo somewhere, only to be consumed by people who are openly talking about it, but that it becomes a wider social conversation. So you locate the problem and the challenge, not for that one individual and that one individual's family, but as an entire community, as an entire society. And so in that sense, I would say the first thing is for leaders across segments, and this is something that we all do in all our leadership positions and in various forums, is to talk about mental illness and talk about mental health challenges at a systemic level, at a family level, at an organizational level. And then what does change look like? How do you actually seed those, the waves of change, right? And what is our individual role in that? So that is certainly at one level. within families, within a personal context where it is considered maximum, sort of the conditioning is very much around, not talking badly about things or not sharing and being a bit closed door about it. I would say, it's about opening those conversations, opening the possibilities for generations to talk about mental illness and challenges associated with it openly. And that is when the dinner table conversation changes. The narrative in the room changes. It empowers the young people in the family to open up because they see the elders talking about it. And you will discover that many people in the older generation have the same problems. They just never had the permission or the opportunity to be able to address it. So I think enabling those conversations in simple common terms in classrooms, in colleges, in college campuses, and in around dinner tables in homes is really a critical starting point. Because as the narrative builds and as those stories are shared and people start expressing their needs, the services will get built. I mean, today there is Amaha, and we have set off on this journey to be able to be there for whoever is ready and willing to get help, no matter what kind of help they need, no matter what illness. But tomorrow there will be hundreds of players who will be able to offer that support as more and more people rise up and say, this is what I need, right? And so that's really what I would say. And stigma is one of those things that it only goes away with the power of conversation. Right? The more open we are, the more we have left stigma behind.
All right. Looking back on your caregiving journey, what advice would you offer to others who are caring for somebody with a mental health condition?
I think the first thing to do is really understand what you're dealing with. Recognize what the challenge is, what the presentation of the symptoms is, what the diagnosis could be, and what the appropriate treatment plan is. So that would be number one. Number two would be to really make an effort and find the right care and support that is needed, whether it's psychiatric support, therapeutic support, group support, community-based work, whatever might be needed, but to identify the right care and support that are needed. The third would be to make a plan together with the person who is suffering, to be able to co-create what that journey of recovery looks like, make them feel also that they are participating in that journey of recovery. So the third would be to really make a plan. The fourth would really be to set some boundaries, make priorities. This is not going to be an easy journey. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And therefore to set boundaries and make some priorities. And the fifth would be to enjoy the small wins, because that is really important to take us from one day to the next day.
Right.